everybody, I'm Angie Larson, and welcome to our Against All Odds student event. I am so glad that you are here. So today we're talking about what it means to be a student and to live a life that goes against all odds. Now, I don't know about you, but I love an underdog movie. You know, one where someone has achieved something that no one expected them to be able to do. Movies like Miracle, right? You'll remember this one where this group of United States hockey players have to team up together and train super hard so that they can go beat the top-ranked Russian hockey players in the Olympics. And this event is called the Miracle on Ice. I also love movies like the Lego Movie, where, you know, there's just a regular Lego guy. He's a little construction worker named Emmett, but then he becomes the special, and he ends up defeating the Lord Business Tyrant who's trying to glue everything together. Or movies like Mulan, you know, where a young woman enters into the Chinese army disguised as a man in order to save her father. And against all odds, it's Mulan, the woman in disguise who defeats the evil Khan's army. I love an underdog story. Do you like these against all odds underdog stories? These stories they show and they give us this illustration that anyone might be able to achieve what might seem impossible. So students, I have a question for you today. What kind of odds do you feel like you are up against in your life? I mean, I'm sure it's not really a Russian hockey team or the Khan army or Lord Business, but I think that every single one of us has something that we struggle up against, some difficulty in our life that we have to overcome. I mean, maybe your parents fight all the time, or maybe you're not sure exactly what to do with your crazy hair like me, or maybe your friends just seem to leave you out when you want so badly to be included. Or maybe you're afraid you won't measure up in school or on your sports team. Or maybe, let's be honest, some days your mental health just isn't so great. Sometimes it feels like the odds are so stacked against us and then we don't know what to do about it. And with whoever you are sitting with today, would you discuss this for a second? What part of your life do you feel like the odds are stacked against you? You know, over and over again, I think it feels like the odds are stacked against us. And sometimes it feels like it's just too much to come back from. It can be really overwhelming, can't it? Really, really tough. And I'll be honest, you and I, we're not Mulan. Life can be really, really hard, and it can throw us some really difficult situations. I'm going to share some odds with you that are tough to kind of think about. Odds like this: 1 in 5 teenagers will experience depression. 1 in 3 will struggle with anxiety. 50% of all students will experience bullying in school, and 1 in 4 experience bullying online. 6 out of 10 students report feeling lonely in their life. And 84% of students say that they'd rather turn to the internet for answers than the adults in their life. And 9 out of 10 adults who are addicted to alcohol or drugs are because they started when they were a teenager. Now, none of us want any of these odds, do we? So what does it mean for us to live a life that goes against all odds? So I want to use this tennis ball today to help us think about this. So here's the thing about this tennis ball. When I toss it down at the ground, it comes back to me. It bounces back up to me. This tennis ball, it's designed to do exactly that. Because this tennis ball is resilient, meaning that it's able to come back, to be able to bounce back to me. I want to wonder with you for a second, what if something bad happened to this tennis ball? Like, what if I took this little letter opener here and I decided to poke a hole in this tennis ball? Kind of like that, right? So now this tennis ball, it's got this big old gaping hole in it. Do you think it will still bounce back? Well, let's give it a shot. Yeah, the tennis ball still bounces back. Now, what do you think would happen if I gave this tennis ball and I gave it to my dog and we played catch with it for a while and she just chewed on it for a little while? Would this tennis ball still be able to bounce back? Yeah, it would, because this tennis ball is resilient. It is able to bounce back even when it's been poked into or chewed on, even when it's been totally, completely hurt and marred. And here's the real amazing thing, my friends. God made you resilient too, made you kind of like this tennis ball. Because we have a God that helps us bounce back. when things seem hard or they feel like the odds are stacked up against us. We can recover from the difficulties in our life because we have a God that is with us through them. Now, studies show that there are two things that can help us grow in our own personal resiliency, that help us grow in our ability to bounce back when tough things happen. And here's the good news, that God, in God's goodness, he gives us access to those two things. And those two things are 1, connection, and 2, empathy. Throughout the Bible, God, Jesus, wanted to connect with people, mostly the people that didn't actually have connections with other people in society. You see, Jesus spent his time and he connected with the people that were the underdogs of society, the lost, the last, the least, and the lowest. People like Zacchaeus, the short tax collector, who people hated, but Jesus loved. People like Mary Magdalene, a woman who was seen as an outsider, who even Jesus' closest friend wasn't sure what he was doing with Mary, but Jesus loved her anyway. Jesus hung out with people who suffered from illnesses like mental health and disease, and Jesus wanted to connect with people who felt like they were less than worthy of connection, people who felt like the odds were stacked against them, people who felt like they couldn't bounce back, people who were resilient against their struggles, and they became resilient because of that connection. When I was growing up, I moved like a lot. I went to 5 elementary schools in 5 different states, and then 3 high schools in 2 different states. And I'll be honest, it knocked me down. It felt so hard to be resilient, hard to bounce back after a move, hard to make new friends and start all over again. And I'll tell you what my biggest fear was. My biggest fear was every time I entered into a new school, my biggest fear was who I would sit with at lunch. Anyone else struggle with who am I going to sit with at lunch? It seemed to me like everyone already had these friend groups, and I felt like the odds were stacked against me, and I would probably sit alone. And I remember very clearly the first day of my sophomore year of high school when I had moved to Dallas, Texas, from right here in Minnesota. And I was looking around this full lunchroom, and I felt overwhelmed and unable to find an open seat in this full lunchroom. That was until Missy Marks, a beautiful girl in a cheerleading outfit, got up over from her table, and she came up to where I was standing. And in the deepest act of kindness that I could ask for, she grabbed my lunch tray and said, "Hi, I'm Missy. I can tell that you're new. Why don't you come sit with us?" And I walked with her. I followed her over to where her and her friends sat. You see, this connection, it meant everything to me. And here's the truth of the matter. Everyone in the whole world needs connection. This means you, this means me, this means your parents. And here's the beautiful thing about Jesus. Jesus is always reaching out to accept you, to love you, and to connect with you. And because Jesus does this for us, then we get to do this for each other. We get to help each other become more resilient, because connection makes us resilient. It helps us and it guides us when we feel like the odds are stacked against us. Connection helps us to bounce back when something bad happens or something difficult or challenging happens in our lives. I want to leave you with a couple of questions to think about today. Number 1, what kind of things do you find it hard to bounce back from? And number 2, when has connection helped you through a tough time in your life? Okay, get ready to discuss those. But until then, hey Hans, are you ready? Hans, it's your turn.
Hey everybody, Pastor Hans here, and we today are talking about bouncing back. We're talking about how it is that we live resilient lives, because we believe that God has given us 2 tools. God has given us a lot of tools, but God has given us 2 tools specifically that help us live resilient lives, that help us bounce back when times are tough. Angie talked about the first one. And that's people. It's community. God has given us the gift of people to help us bounce back when times are when times are tough. Now, I don't need to tell you this because you've experienced it. Over the last year, we have not been surrounded by as many people as we all want to. Students, for a period of time, your sports were put on hold. Students, you've been in distance learning every other day, this hybrid model. You haven't been around other people as much as usual. And this is true about students as well as adults. When we are isolated, our isolation does something to us. Isolation always leads to a lack of toleration. Let me say that again. Isolation always leads to a lack of toleration. And I think we've all felt this over the last year. We felt that the temperature has been turned up in culture and in our lives and on the television. It seems like we've all gotten fuses that are a little bit shorter because of our isolation and all the restrictions that have been put on our lives. We see this on TV. We see it in our friends. We see it in our parents even, and maybe even your parents' friends. There have been all these issues we've had to face as people, whether that be COVID and all the restrictions. Maybe it's politics, it's racial struggles. And it seems like there has been this lack of toleration because of our isolation. And I don't know about you, but when I look at what's going on in our world, it seems that people are angry more often than ever before. People are angry and they want to dig in their heels. People are angry, saying it's my way or the highway. People are angry, seeing things only from their perspective. And so today I want to talk to you about a second tool that God has given us. And it goes something like this. Rather than anger, God has given us the gift of empathy. Empathy is the second gift I think God has given us to help us live resilient lives where we can bounce back when times are tough. Empathy. Now, empathy probably isn't a word, students, that you use on a regular basis. So here's a definition. Empathy is the ability to understand, to be sensitive to, and to be aware of other people's feelings, their thoughts, and their experiences. And there's a really great story in the Bible all about empathy that I want to share with you today. There are two disciples, Peter and John, and they go to the temple almost every day. They go there to pray or to be with their friends. And there on the steps of the temple every day is this man who is a beggar. He's crippled, and every day he's there, and he's begging for handouts. Now, every day they see him there, just like everyone else, and I imagine most people as they pass by, they're a little bit annoyed, to be honest. Probably in that culture, they were kind of disgusted by him. And I imagine a few of them even got angry over time that they had to pass by this man sitting there on the steps. And I imagine even Jesus' disciples, Peter and John, felt the same way. Well, one day, the book of Acts, chapter 3, tells the story of Peter and John going to the temple, and this time, rather than simply passing by, something happens. One day, Peter and John were going up to the temple at the time of prayer at 3 p.m. Now, a man crippled from birth was being carried to the temple, where he was put every day to beg from those going into the temple courts. When he saw Peter and John about to enter, he asked them for money. Peter, get this, Peter looked straight at him, as did John. You see, they had passed by this man every day, but it says that day was different. That day, they looked at him. In fact, the Bible was originally written in the language of Greek. And the words translated there, looked at him, actually are translated from a word that means it's more than just to look at somebody. Their eyes were riveted on that man that day. Their eyes were fixed on him. They looked at him intensely. And rather than just looking at him as someone who's filthy as they had other days, someone to be disgusted by, they looked at him and they had empathy for him. And the story says that they would go on to heal him. They had empathy for him. You see, I think this story is an invitation to us, if you consider yourself a Christian. It's an invitation to us to do the same with those around us. You see, they didn't just look at that man. They looked at that man. They looked at him and wondered about his story and who he was, and they had empathy for him. And I think we're invited to do the same. We're invited to look deeply at those who maybe have lives that are different than ours. We're invited by God to look at those who maybe have different opinions about things than we do, different perspectives. Empathy is all about being curious about those who maybe aren't like you. It's wanting to get to know their story so you can understand them. It's wondering, I wonder why they think the way they do. You see, it's about empathy. It's about having empathy and leaning in. For example, students, I'm sure my parents were the only ones who had rules. Anybody else have rules around your house? And sometimes those rules, be honest, they can feel really restrictive. Like sometimes, I'm guessing you feel like I did when I was a kid, like, why are my parents so worried about me? Why do they have all these rules? And it's easy for us as students to get angry. But rather, what if you were to have empathy instead? To think, what is it like to be a parent today? Here's the thing about parents. I know this because I am one. Your parents are they're actually really nervous about being your parent. They're actually a little bit scared because you're the most important possession in their life and you didn't come with an owner's manual. What would it be like, rather than getting angry, to have empathy? Or how about this one for your teachers? I'm guessing you, like me, when I was a student, there were times where I got really angry at my teachers about a certain grade maybe they gave me, or about being stringent on an assignment. What if rather than anger, we were to have empathy, to put ourselves in their shoes? Or maybe for you, it's a coach who doesn't give you enough playing time, or you don't agree with the way he's coaching, and you get angry. What if you were instead to have empathy and wonder, what is it like to live in their shoes? Or how about this? We all have friends. Friends at times seem kind of like they go through a period where they're mean, or maybe they distance themselves from us. And it's easy to get angry, but what if you were to have empathy, to wonder why they would do that? And I think if you wondered, you'd come to find that your friends are just as insecure about things as you are. I know that's true for adults as well. That they're just trying to fit in, and sometimes they don't do it in the best ways. Or maybe they come from homes that aren't quite as stable as your home. The last example I want to give you is yourself. Anybody ever get angry with yourself? I sure do. I look at the mirror from time to time when I've done something stupid and I go, you are an idiot. Anybody else do that? And I wonder what it would be like for us, rather than getting angry at ourselves and comparing ourselves to all the other kids, if we were instead to have empathy with ourselves, to treat ourselves with grace. Empathy that says to yourself, that has you saying to yourself that there's always a next time. Empathy that has you saying to yourself, there are always going to be second chances. Empathy that has you saying to yourself, you know what, I'm so much more than the number of goals I score, or that relationship I seem to have messed up. I'm always loved by God. You see, empathy is about a choice. And you're invited today to choose empathy over anger. Because anger will always get us stuck. When I was in high school, I made a lot of mistakes. Anybody else make mistakes? I made a lot of mistakes. I worked on a farm one summer, and on that farm, I was not a farm kid, so I didn't really understand farm stuff. And there was a big truck that I was put in charge of. I had to haul grain to the elevator. And I was far too young to be driving this farm truck. And do you know what I did? It was a gasoline truck, and I accidentally put diesel fuel in that truck. Yeah, talk about a big mistake. I'm lucky that farmer didn't kill me, huh? But I took that truck, and it actually drove about a half mile down the road, and then smoke came out of it everywhere. Why do I tell you this lame story about a big mistake I made? Well, because when we choose anger, it's sort of like putting diesel fuel in a gasoline truck. You see, that truck wasn't made to run on diesel fuel. And you and I, we weren't made to live on anger. We'll get stuck. It'll mess us up. It's not what God had imagined for us to live on. You see, God invites us to choose empathy rather than anger. Folks, it's so great being with you today. We've been talking all about how do we bounce back? How do we build resilient lives? And what are the tools God has given us? And so as we close today, those two things are community, people. We need people who love us and love God. We got to surround ourselves with people like that. But secondly, God invites us that rather than anger, to choose empathy. So here's a couple of questions for you as we close today. Where in your life do you feel yourself drawn to anger rather than empathy? Where in your life? What situation? What friendship? What topic? Where do you find yourself drawn towards anger rather than empathy? And lastly, how? How could you move yourself from anger to empathy? Folks, it's so great being with you. Parents, students, I'm so proud of you spending this time together and wondering, how is it we build resilient lives? How do we build lives, the sort of lives that God wants for people like you and people like me? Have a good one.